The Haverhill Historical Society, also known as Buttonwoods, was named for the sycamore trees planted in the 1740s all over the property when the English settlers came to Haverhill. On this property, there are 3 important sites that are significant to the history of Haverhill in different time periods. First is the Samuel White Duncan House. This house was built in 1814 by John Duncan, who was a Haverhill merchant during this time period. Second is a tenant farmhouse called the John Ward House, which was built in 1710. Third is the Daniel Hunkins Shoe Shop, which was built in 1850 by Daniel A. Hunkins. These 3 sites are crucial to telling the story of Haverhill's past. The Duncan House was a wedding present from John Duncan to his son Samuel Duncan and his daughter-in-law Mary. This house is an excellent example of the federal-style houses being built in the United States during the late 1700s to the early 1800s. Some parts of the Duncan House that show the federal architecture are the fan-style front door, size of the windows, and the balance of the rooms in the house. Since the Duncans were merchants in Haverhill in the 1800s, they were a very wealthy family. Their wealth and success show an important part of Haverhill's economy, which was trading. The Merrimack River is where most of this trading happened. The Duncans were involved in exporting and importing goods on the Merrimack River to many different places, like England, the West Indies, and China. The main exports that went out of Haverhill were fish, lumber, beef, barrels, and shoes. And the main imports were goods like molasses, spices, sugar, tea, and cloth. The Duncans were one of the many families that participated and benefited from the trade on the Merrimack River in Haverhill, and there's even a document showing John Duncan's right to trade, and that his goods will be sold at his stores in Haverhill and New Hampshire. Reverend John Ward was the first minister of Haverhill in 1640. The John Ward House was built on his property, but he did not live in it. He gave this house to his daughter Elizabeth. Elizabeth married Nathaniel Saltonstall in 1663, and this house was used by tenant farmers on both the Ward and Saltonstall properties. The house was actually used for protection from the French and Indian attacks on Haverhill. There are 2 parts of this house, the first built in 1710 to 1720, and it contains the kitchen where the farmers would cook. The second part was added on in the early 1820s as a parlor. The significance of this house to the history of Haverhill is to show life during and after English settlement. There are many artifacts in this house that show the daily life of a woman in this time period. The first are the essex used to control how close pots hung to the fire. There is also a beehive oven in the wall that was very popular. A fire was built inside the oven, and the ashes were used to cook with. Third is the swinging broom that women used to prevent fire catching on their skirts. The new part of the John Ward House really shows the changes in the time period. The ceilings are much higher in this section of the house, and the walls are white, unlike the kitchen. There are also windows called Indian shutters on the new part of the house. They were actually not used to prevent from Indians, but instead to block out the noise, light, and the cold. Another main part of Haverhill's economic success is shoemaking. Haverhill was a world leader in the shoemaking industry, being third in total shoe production following only Philadelphia and Lynn. The Daniel Hunkins Shoe Shop was one of many in Haverhill that shoemakers hand-sewed, cut, and pegged shoes. Haverhill obtained the nickname Queen Slipper City from its reputation of quality handmade shoes, especially women's shoes. Haverhill's shoe production put them worldwide, exporting their shoes to the southern colonies and West Indies. The shop is only 16 by 9 feet with 3 to 4 people working in it during the day. There was one master shoemaker, 1 to 2 journeymen, and 1 apprentice. Awls, pincers, and knives were some of the tools these workers used in the shop. Many of the shoemakers were farmers who made shoes on the side when the weather was not good for farming. Daniel Hunkins, however, was primarily a shoemaker. Because of the many tanneries that also existed in Haverhill due to the many streams that could be used for power and water, it was a prime spot for these shoe shops. When the sewing machine was invented, more shoes began to be made in bigger factories. Haverhill's economy rocketed when immigrants from Ireland, Italy, and Eastern Europe came to the United States to work in these factories. By 1890, over 11,000 people were employed in the shoe industry, and Haverhill had over 200 shoe establishments. The history of Haverhill is important to understanding how life was in different time periods, starting when the first settlers came to the United States. Buttonwoods is key in showing this past. The economic success trading on the Merrimack River, how life was like for farmers in Haverhill, especially women, and how significant the shoe industry was to Haverhill are all shown by these sites.